Hello everybody and welcome back to Vehicles of War Thunder. So in this episode we are going to be covering for the first time a Japanese aircraft, and I figured what is a better place to start than with their reserve vehicles. So in this episode we will be covering the Kawasaki Ki-10, which had the allied reporting name of Perry. In the spring of 1935, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force was looking for a new fighter that was on par with the British Hawker Fury or the American Boeing P-26. Kawasaki Ki Kogyo, which I'm pretty sure I messed up, which more or less translates to Kawasaki Aircraft Industries, and Nakajima were the only two companies that I was able to find that competed in this competition. Kawasaki would propose a biplane design after their last attempt at a new fighter, which came in the form of the Ki-5, which was a monoplane design that used an inverted gull-wing design and was rejected back in 1934 for not being maneuverable enough. Nakajima, on the other hand, would develop their own monoplane called the Ki-11. In the end, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force would choose the Kawasaki Ki-10 over the Ki-11, due to it being more maneuverable. The Ki-11 was designed by the Japanese aeronautical engineer Tycho Dow, who had succeeded the German aircraft designer Richard Vaught as the chief designer at Kawasaki. The Ki-10, or more formally the Army Type 95 fighter, presumably named as such because the Gregorian calendar year of 1935, which was when the aircraft entered service, was the year 2595 in the Japanese imperial calendar. It was powered by a Kawasaki Ha-92A V19 liquid-cooled engine that developed 850 horsepower. It was driven by a two-blade wooden propeller. The first prototype was completed in March 1935 and was quickly followed up by the second prototype in April of the same year. The Ki-10 was faster and more maneuverable than the previous Ki-5 that Kawasaki had designed, and more maneuverable but slower than the Nakajima Ki-11. In an attempt to increase the speed of the Ki-10, a third prototype was developed that used a metal three-bladed propeller, with flush head rivets being used in an attempt to reduce drag. A fourth prototype with similar changes was also developed, but that also had an increase dihedral on the upper wings so as to improve stability. These changes helped to close the speed gap, and combined with its better maneuverability compared to the competition, ensured that Kawasaki won the production contract for Japan's new fighter. The Ki-10 did see action during the Second Sino-Japanese War. One tale that I was able to find is that on September 21st, 1937, Major Hiroshi Miwa, who was formerly hired as a military flight instructor for Marshal Chang's Fengtian, probably mispronounced that, Army Air Corps, and was well known in the Chinese military aviation circles of the time, commanded a flight of 7 Ki-10 fighters of the 1st Daitai 16 Hiko Rentai that were escorting 14 Mitsubishi Ki-2 bombers on an attack on the city Taiwan, probably mispronounced that, in the Shaanxi province. During this mission, he encountered resistance from the Chinese Air Force that were flying V-65C Corsairs, an export variant for China of the Vought O2U Corsair, and Curtiss Hawk IIs. He managed to shoot down a few, but he also was shot down himself and was fatally wounded by Captain Chan Ki-wong, the commander of the 28th Pursuit Squadron of the 5th Pursuit Group, who was flying a Curtiss Hawk. The Ki-10 also saw action during the battles of Khalkhin Gol, even though it was largely obsolete by that time and was being superseded by the Nakajima Ki-27. In fact, the map that we are currently playing on in the background is actually War Thunder's The Last Battle of Khalkhin Gol. So, coincidence that ended up playing out like that. There are 4 variants of this aircraft that ever existed, as far as I could find. These are the only 4. First up is the Ki-10-1, or more formally the Army Type 95 Fighter Model 1. This was the first production version and was identical to the 4th prototype. It was armed with 2 7.7mm Type 89 machine guns mounted on the upper decking of the engine cowling. 300 units of this model were built between December 1935 and October 1937. Next up is the Ki-10-2, more formally the Army Type 95 Fighter Model 2. And this model was developed at the same time as the Ki-10-1 was being produced. The most distinctive difference is that it has a longer fuselage and larger wings than the Ki-10-1, and as a result was significantly more stable. The 185th Ki-10 was used as the prototype, and the design was accepted by the Imperial Japanese Army and entered production with 280 units being produced between June 1937 and December 1938. Next up is the Ki-10-1 Kai, which was a cleaned-up version of the Ki-10-1 that was produced in April to October of 1936 using the 200th Ki-10 airframe. The changes with this variant included a new low-drag cantilever undercarriage, and the radiator was moved back from its original position under the engine to being between the undercarriage legs. These changes, while using the same engine as the standard Ki-10-1, resulted in the top speed of the aircraft increasing by around about 20 kilometers an hour. Finally, the Ki-10-2 Kai was produced by incorporating those same changes that were made on the Ki-10-1 Kai to two different Ki-10-2s. On top of those changes, however, they also changed the engine, replacing it with the Ha-92B, a further refinement of the engine that was already being used by the Ki-10. This new engine was capable of producing 950 horsepower for short bursts at 3,800 meters. Now, for how this aircraft actually performs in game, as a reserve aircraft, the Ki-10 is a decent aircraft. Since the guns don't carry much ammo and it has a fairly slow rate of fire compared to some of its contemporaries. However, that also can be a downside. Because of that relatively low ammo capacity, and that's a negative once you take into account that 7.7 millimeters will often struggle to do any significant damage to your enemies. That's just something I've noticed in War Thunder. 7.7s are basically worthless. Just in general, whether you're in an aircraft or in a tank, 7.7s don't really do much. It's also further hampered by generally lackluster belt options. At the end of the day, the only belt that's really worth using once you unlock the ability to swap from the default belt is the stealth belt. And the reason for that is quite simply because it has the most amount of AP that gets fired in any regular interval. And so you're going to struggle to set things on fire in general with most of the other ones. So you're going to be generally relying on using that AP to basically saw off the wings of your enemy. So often what ends up being your best ways to get kills are, like I said, basically sawing off one of your enemy's wings, taking advantage of all that AP that the stealth belt includes. Or getting pilot snipes, if you're able to get those consistently, that also helps. And theoretically, with the stealth belt, it is possible to set fires. It's not super common, but it is theoretically possible. If you do get lucky and you set a fire and the enemy doesn't manage to put it out, then great. You got a kill by setting a fire instead of getting a pilot snipe or sawing off their wing. But still, as a general rule of thumb, I wouldn't count on it. You're gonna want to generally just aim for your enemy's wings when you're flying. Really, any Japanese aircraft that's using the Type 89s, and I believe the Type 97s as well, are basically just slightly refined Type 89s. Japan does not have particularly good small caliber machine guns on their aircraft. Is just something to put out there. However, and of course it should be noted, because of the relatively small ammo capacity you carry, as well as your guns just not doing a whole hell of a lot of damage, you need to, one, not be somebody who sprays and prays. These guns don't jam that easily, but they can still do it. And so, but one thing that should be noted is that you're going to potentially have issues getting more than 1 or 2 kills in a match in a lot of cases. Just because to knock out an enemy, again, unless you get those pilot snipes cut off their wing or set a fire and they don't manage to put it out, you're going to have to expend quite a bit of ammo just to kill a single enemy. And so often a full load of ammo will maybe net you 2 kills as a general rule of thumb. As a result, and these matches tend to be over relatively quickly, so you're probably not going to have time to go back to base, usually, to rearm and get some more ammo and go and get a couple more kills. So you often, like I said, you'll get 1, maybe 2 kills. You're going to struggle often. But the Ki-10s do have one thing that is really nice for them, and that is they can turn very well. Admittedly, that's not too surprising for Japan. Lots of their fighters, particularly their early stuff, are really good at turning, not necessarily the greatest at boom and zoom. Some of them can be used that way, but turning often ends up being one of their defining traits that you're going to take advantage of in combat. Particularly when going up against people who don't have particularly good aircraft that are able to turn, which is pretty much everybody else. Generally speaking, most countries don't have particularly good turn fighters beyond their reserve aircraft, and even then, some reserve aircrafts aren't that great at turning either. So you can manage to make very tight turns, especially if you sort of control your elevator to give you that little bit of extra oomph to make tight turns. So that is a very nice thing about the Ki-10, is that if an enemy gets on your 6, and assuming they don't knock you out with their initial volley, you actually have a half-decent chance of being able to reverse on them just by making a very tight turn. Also, the Ki-10 is a fairly decent climber. It actually has a fairly decent climb rate, especially for a reserve aircraft. As a result, you have the ability to actually climb away from some early enemy fighters, mostly the biplanes, but some monoplanes will struggle to catch you in a climb as well. As a result, if you play War Thunder with friends, especially, it is possible to take advantage of all this to potentially set up enemies for your friend to shoot at. So if an enemy comes in and you just start climbing and draining them of their speed, your friend can potentially swoop in and get a kill nice and easily if the enemy is very tunnel vision on you, which is a fairly common thing, especially at these lower battle ratings, that people get tunnel vision very easily. I mean, it happens in general, but especially at lower tiers, it's pretty common. But at the end of the day, really, the Ki-10 is a, at best, average aircraft. Realistically speaking, though, I would probably put it slightly below average. It's not that great. It's not complete garbage, just like the P-40 that I reviewed, or well, not reviewed, but talked about recently. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's okay. So that's just something you have to take into account with some of these aircraft. Is, like I said, the Ki-10 it's great at turning. It's got a good climb rate, but the guns and the belts really hold it back. But like I said, if you make use of that turning ability to set up shots for friendlies, that's a very valid option in this aircraft. especially if you already have it spaded and you're trying to help a friend who recently got into the game type thing. You can set up shots for him, and he can get nice, relatively easy kills, potentially, especially because, like I said, at lower tiers, people do tend to tunnel vision quite easily, even though that's just a general thing they do, but especially at lower tiers. All in all, that's going to be it for this episode, actually. It's not a super long episode. There's really just not a whole lot to say about the Ki-10. Like I said, it's average. It really is. At best, it's average. Realistically, I'd say it's slightly below average, but give or take a little bit, it all sort of evens out in the end. So that'll be it for this episode. I will see you all next time, where we'll be visiting a nation we haven't actually touched at all yet. So feel free to leave a comment guessing if it'll be Sweden or France, because I'm pretty sure those are the only two nations that I haven't touched at all in this series. I mean, technically China, but a lot of China stuff, particularly at lower tiers, is copy-paste of other countries' stuff. So, I mean, technically China's an option. They do have some unique aircraft. They have the CW-21. We'll get around to that one eventually, I'm sure, but I'm in no immediate rush to get to it. A quick reminder that I do have a Patreon and a Discord, so you'll find links to those down below in the description. If you find yourself enjoying this series, Patreon is the easiest and best way to support it. For as little as $1 a month, you'll get early access to all of my videos, typically about a week, give or take a couple days. And that'll allow you to be able to chime in with stuff, depending on the video, obviously. But at least you'll be able to see it early. And if I manage to keep pumping out these Vehicle of War Thunder videos relatively as quickly as I am, that's not necessarily a bad thing, actually. I'm a little bit shocked that I'm managing to do this, but then again, I do have a little bit extra free time right now, so that's helping me out. As for the Discord, that is my go-to place for posting about the channel, so I do highly recommend that you join that if you want to stay up to date on the channel in any way. But until next time, sayonara. Mispronounce that. Sayonara.